My family spent 18 years preparing me for a life I never agreed to, and the day I learned why, I vanished. I always knew motherhood would change me. I just didn't expect it to save me. My name doesn't matter anymore, not the one I was born with, at least. What matters is that I'm a mother, and for a long time, I was the only person standing between my son and a world that didn't know how to treat him gently. My son is autistic, high functioning, they like to say, as if that somehow makes things easier, as if labels soften reality. He notices everything: patterns, tone, lies. He remembers details adults forget 5 minutes later. He also feels things deeply, even when he doesn't show it the way people expect. His father left when he was still small, not violently, not dramatically, just quietly, like someone slipping out of a room hoping no one notices. After that, it was just us. We were doing fine. Not perfect, but safe, predictable, calm. That calm made certain people uncomfortable. My ex-husband's family never liked that I didn't need them. They said I was too independent, too controlling, too serious. They said my son needed more discipline, more structure, more normal exposure. What they meant was obedience. The first report came in on a Tuesday: Child Protective Services. The words alone made my hands go cold. They said someone had called with concerns: emotional neglect, educational neglect, failure to provide a stable environment. I remember staring at the wall while the woman on the phone spoke calmly, professionally, like she wasn't dismantling my entire sense of safety with every sentence. They came to our house 2 days later. My son sat beside me on the couch, hands folded neatly in his lap, answering questions with the same careful precision he used when explaining how planets orbit stars. He told them about his routines, his books, his room. He told them I made the best pasta and always warned him before loud noises. After they left, he looked at me and said, "They were trying to see if I'm broken." I told him he wasn't. I didn't realize yet that this was only the beginning. Over the next few months, the reports kept coming. Different accusations, same tone, always vague enough to require investigation, always timed right after I refused a visit or set a boundary or said no. I started documenting everything: dates, times, screenshots, emails. I trusted my instincts, even when people told me I was overreacting. Then the court papers arrived: custody review, emergency hearing, petition for full guardianship filed by my ex-husband's parents. They claimed I was unfit, that my son's autism made me incapable of meeting his needs, that he would be better off with people who understood structure and discipline. They never once asked what my son wanted. The night before the first hearing, my son sat on his bed lining up his favorite books in a perfect row. He didn't look scared. He looked thoughtful. "I've been recording," he said quietly. I froze. "Recording what?" I asked. "Everything," he replied. "People lie less when they think no one is listening, but they lie anyway." That was the moment I understood something very clearly. This wasn't just a custody battle. It was a war over who got to define my child, and I was done being polite. The first hearing felt unreal, like I had stepped into someone else's nightmare and couldn't wake up. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not just the temperature, but the atmosphere. Everything echoed: footsteps, papers, voices that spoke about my life like it was a file number. My ex-husband's parents sat behind their lawyer, hands folded, faces calm. Too calm. They didn't look angry or worried. They looked prepared. That scared me more than anything. Their lawyer spoke first. He used words like concern and best interest and developmental risk. He talked about my son's autism, as if it were a defect that needed correcting. He implied that my parenting style was too soft, too accommodating, too emotional. He suggested that routine had turned into isolation, that support had turned into control. I wanted to stand up and scream that they had no idea who my son was, that they had never sat on the floor with him while he explained the difference between meteors and meteorites, that they had never watched him calm himself during sensory overload because he trusted the space around him. But I stayed seated. My lawyer squeezed my arm gently and told me to breathe. When it was my turn, I spoke carefully. I talked about therapy appointments, school evaluations, progress reports. I talked about structure, not punishment, support, not force. I showed records, charts, emails, evidence of a stable, loving home. The judge listened, took notes, asked questions. Still, I could feel the weight of doubt hanging in the room. Then they brought up the reports. Multiple calls, multiple concerns. A pattern, they said. As if repetition made something true. As if numbers mattered more than context. That's when I realized what they were doing. They weren't trying to prove I was dangerous. They were trying to exhaust me. Every report meant time off work. Another investigation, another evaluation, another explanation. They wanted me tired enough to slip, emotional enough to look unstable, overwhelmed enough to fail in public. My son sat beside me during a break, swinging his legs slightly, eyes focused on the floor tiles. "They keep using the same phrases," he whispered. "It's like a script." I looked at him, surprised. "They don't change their words," he continued. "They just change who says them." He was right. That night, I went home and reorganized everything. Not just documents, but my mindset. I stopped reacting. I started preparing. I created timelines, cross-referenced statements, highlighted inconsistencies. I stopped assuming the truth would be obvious and started proving it would be undeniable. The next hearing came faster than I expected. This time, they pushed harder. They questioned my mental health, my emotional attachment. They implied that my son depended on me too much, that his independence was being delayed by my presence. I felt anger rise, hot and sharp, but I didn't let it show. Because this wasn't about how I felt. This was about survival. When the judge asked if there was anything else to add, my lawyer stood. And then my son did something none of them expected. He raised his hand. The room went silent, and I knew in that moment that everything was about to change. The judge hesitated when my son raised his hand. Children aren't supposed to interrupt courtrooms, especially children like mine, who people assume need to be spoken for. The room shifted in that uncomfortable way it does when something unscripted happens. My heart started pounding, not from fear of what he might say, but from knowing how rarely people listened when he did. The judge looked at my lawyer, then at me. "Does the child wish to speak?" she asked. My lawyer nodded slowly. "If the court allows it." I felt my son's fingers brush against my sleeve. A silent question, a check-in. I leaned toward him and whispered that he could speak if he wanted to, and that he didn't need to rush. He stood up carefully, smoothing his shirt the way he always did when he wanted to feel composed. He didn't look at his grandparents. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked at the judge. "I know why I'm here," he said. His voice was steady, not loud, not shaky, just clear. "They think my mom is hurting me because she lets me be the way I am." A few people shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. "My brain works differently," he continued. "It always has. My mom didn't cause that. She helps me manage it. There's a difference." I felt tears burn behind my eyes, but I kept my gaze fixed forward. This was his moment. He explained his routines, why predictability helped him think, why punishment made things worse, not better. He described meltdowns without embarrassment, like facts that didn't need apologizing for. He talked about how I helped him regulate without shame. Then he said something that made the room go completely still. "I record conversations," he said, "because adults say things they don't want remembered." His grandparents' lawyer stiffened. "I didn't know what was important at first," my son continued. "So I recorded everything. Visits, phone calls, even things people said when they thought I wasn't paying attention." The judge leaned forward. My lawyer gently asked him how long he'd been doing this. "Since the first report," he replied. "I noticed the timing pattern." I watched disbelief spread across faces that had dismissed him as fragile or confused. "They told me my mom was making me weak," he said calmly. "But I don't feel weak. I feel safe with her. That's why I can talk like this." Silence filled the room, heavy and undeniable. The judge thanked him and told him he could sit. As he did, he leaned toward me and whispered, "I didn't say anything untrue." I squeezed his hand, my throat too tight to answer. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something shift. Not sympathy, respect, but I also knew something else. People who lose control of the narrative rarely accept it quietly, and this was far from over. The next hearing didn't feel like the others. There was a tension in the room that hadn't been there before, like everyone knew something was about to surface. My ex-husband's parents avoided looking at us. Their lawyer kept adjusting his tie, papers shuffling too loudly in the silence. My son sat beside me, calm as ever. He had brought his backpack, the same one he carried to school every day. Inside it was something that had quietly changed the balance of everything. When the judge asked if we had additional evidence, my lawyer stood. "Yes, Your Honor," she said. "With the court's permission, we would like to submit recorded material relevant to the pattern of reports and the intent behind them." The word recorded hung in the air. Objections came immediately. Privacy, legality, relevance. My lawyer responded calmly, explaining consent laws, explaining context, explaining how the recordings were made in spaces where my son was legally allowed to document his own interactions. The judge listened. Then she nodded. "Proceed." My lawyer placed a small recorder on the table. Ordinary, unimpressive. The kind of object no one notices until it changes everything. The first audio played. It was my ex-husband's mother's voice, sharp and familiar, telling someone on the phone that if enough reports were filed, eventually something would stick, that courts listened to patterns, not explanations. The second clip followed, his father speaking in a low voice, explaining that my son's autism made him an ideal case, that professionals could be convinced he needed stricter control, that I was too emotionally involved to be trusted. Each clip landed like a weight dropped into still water. No yelling, no dramatics, just their own words, calm and calculated, spoken when they thought no one important was listening. I felt sick, not from shock, but from confirmation. I'd sensed this for months. Hearing it made it real in a way that couldn't be undone. The judge stopped the playback. She removed her glasses and looked directly at them. "Is this an accurate representation of your voices?" she asked. They didn't answer right away. Their lawyer whispered urgently to them, but it didn't matter. Silence said enough. My son shifted beside me and leaned closer. "They said I wouldn't understand," he whispered. "But I did." The judge addressed the court again, her voice firm now. She spoke about misuse of systems meant to protect children, about manipulation, about the seriousness of false reporting. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, validation. But even as the judge spoke, I knew this wasn't the end. People who lose power don't always accept it. Sometimes they try again in quieter ways. And as we left the courtroom that day, I felt relief for the first time, paired with caution, because winning one battle doesn't end a war. The ruling from that hearing should have brought peace. On paper, it did. The judge dismissed the newest filings, issued warnings about false reporting, and ordered supervised contact only, if any contact at all. People congratulated me. "You won," my lawyer said, smiling like this was the end of a chapter. But the problem with surviving manipulation is that you learn something most people never do. Winning doesn't always mean safety. For a few weeks, things were quiet. Too quiet. No surprise visits, no reports, no court letters in the mail. I started sleeping through the night again, though every creak of the house still made my heart jump. Trauma doesn't turn off just because a judge says it should. My son noticed the silence before I did. They stopped trying, he said one night while lining up his books before bed. For now, I answered carefully. He frowned. People don't stop patterns. They pause them. He was 8 years old and already better at recognizing danger than most adults. Then the school call started. Not accusations, questions. Was everything okay at home? Had there been any changes recently? Did my son seem anxious to me? Each call was polite, professional, concerned. And every call came after someone had visited the school. A concerned grandparent, a family friend, someone who just wanted to check in. They were changing tactics. When direct attacks failed, they switched to erosion. Small doubts planted slowly, carefully, like cracks in glass you don't notice until it shatters. One afternoon, my son came home quieter than usual. They asked me if I felt safe when he said not looking up. Who did? The counselor. She asked if you ever yell or get angry. My hands tightened around the kitchen counter. What did you say? He shrugged. I said everyone gets angry sometimes, but you don't scare me. That night, after he went to bed, I sat alone in the dark living room and finally admitted something to myself. They weren't trying to win quickly anymore. They were trying to outlast me. That's when I made the decision I'd been avoiding. I called my lawyer the next morning. I want to move, I said. Not tomorrow, not next week. I want to disappear. She didn't argue. Instead, she sighed softly and said, I was wondering when you'd say that. The plan came together quietly. No announcements. No goodbyes to people who didn't need to know. We told the school we were relocating for work. We packed essentials only. My son treated it like a mission. What's the objective? He asked seriously while labeling boxes. To start over, I said. He nodded. Then we need distance. Patterns weaken with distance. The night before we left, I walked through the house slowly. Every room held memories. Fear, laughter, survival. This place had kept us alive, but it could no longer keep us safe. As we pulled out of the driveway before sunrise, my son pressed his forehead to the window. Are they going to follow us? I don't think so, I said. He considered that. Then he replied quietly, even if they try, they won't find the same people. He was right. We weren't running. We were choosing ourselves. And for the first time since this began, that felt like real power. I thought distance would slow them down. I was wrong. 3 months into our new life, just as routines were settling into place, the letter arrived. No return address, official envelope, heavy paper, court summons. My hands went cold before I even opened it. I didn't need to read the words to know what they meant. They had found a way back in. This time, it wasn't the grandparents. It was my ex. She was filing for custody. I sat at the kitchen table long after my son had gone to bed. The letter unfolded in front of me like a threat disguised as legality. She claimed she was ready now. Stable, healed, capable. The words burned. Ready now, as if motherhood were a delayed appointment, as if abandonment expired. When I told my son the next morning, I expected fear, tears, panic. Instead, he asked one question. Is she doing this because she wants me or because they told her to? That was when I knew he already understood more than I wished he had to. I don't know, I answered honestly. He nodded slowly. Then we should assume it's both. The manipulation this time was quieter, smarter. No false reports, no shouting, just appearances. She showed up to supervised visits dressed like a stranger version of motherhood. Calm voice, gentle smiles, carefully placed apologies. I've changed, she said, not looking at me but at him. He watched her like a scientist observing an experiment. After the visit in the car, he said, she's acting, but she doesn't know her lines very well. I didn't ask him to explain. I already knew what he meant. The second hearing was scheduled quickly, faster than the first. That alone told me something was wrong. Someone was pushing. This time, they brought experts, reports, evaluations done without my consent, observations taken out of context. They framed my protection as control, my structure as isolation, my son's autism as something that needed fixing. Again, but something had changed. My son had changed. The night before court, I found him sitting on his bed with his notebook open, writing carefully. I'm organizing facts, he said, chronologically. You don't have to testify, I reminded him softly. I know, he said, but I want to. The courtroom felt heavier this time, less dramatic, more dangerous. This wasn't a battle fought with emotion. It was being fought with polish. When my ex spoke, she cried at the right moments, used the right language, said all the things people expect a remorseful mother to say. Then my son was called. He walked to the stand without looking at anyone but the judge. I don't hate my mom, he said, but wanting someone and being safe with someone are different things. The room stilled. She didn't leave because she was scared. She left because she didn't want the responsibility. That's okay. But responsibility doesn't come back just because you miss it. I felt my chest crack open. They keep saying I need more people, he continued. But what I need is fewer people who make my brain hurt. The judge leaned forward. And who makes you feel safe? He didn't hesitate. My mom. She listens. She prepares me. She believes me. That was when I realized something important. This wasn't just another attempt. This was their last one, and they were about to lose more than custody. They were about to lose control. The ruling hadn't even been finalized when I knew. This wasn't over. People who lose control don't walk away quietly. They wait. They watch. They look for another opening. And my son and I were too visible, too traceable, too easy to reach if we stayed exactly where we were. So I started preparing without telling him everything. Not because I didn't trust him, but because some kinds of fear don't belong on a child's shoulders. I met with my lawyer again, then with someone she quietly recommended. A woman who didn't wear a suit, didn't offer coffee, and didn't ask unnecessary questions. Clean break, she said calmly. New records, new routines, fewer digital footprints. I swallowed. Is it legal? She met my eyes. It's protective. That was enough. At home, my son sensed the shift immediately. You're moving differently, he said one evening while watching me delete old emails. How so? Like when you're planning, but pretending you're not. I smiled despite myself. You're very observant. I need to know if we're leaving again, he said. No panic, just clarity. Yes, I answered. But this time, it's not because we're scared. Then why? Because staying would mean waiting for the next hit. He thought about that, then nodded. Proactive is better than reactive. We packed slowly, carefully. Nothing sentimental went first, just essentials, documents, clothing, the things that mattered now. I let him choose what came with us. He chose his books, his notebook, one framed drawing he'd made of us holding hands under stars. Everything else is replaceable, he said. The night before we left, I sat on the floor of his room while he arranged labels on a brand new set of folders. What are you writing? I asked. A list of what we survived, he said. So I don't forget. You don't need to remember everything, I told him. Yes, I do, he replied. Some memories protect you. Before dawn, we left without ceremony. No farewell messages, no social posts, no forwarded mail, just two people in a road that led somewhere unknown. At the last red light before the highway, my son looked at me and asked, Are we hiding? No, I said. We're choosing peace. He smiled faintly. That's better. As the city disappeared behind us, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but readiness. They could keep trying to reach us. They just wouldn't recognize who we'd become when they did. The farther we drove, the quieter the world became. Highways turned into smaller roads. Buildings gave way to trees. My phone lost signal in stretches, and instead of panic, I felt relief. Silence wasn't dangerous anymore. It was protective. My son tracked the distance without being asked. We've crossed 2 state lines, he said, checking off something in his notebook. Patterns weakened significantly after the third. I glanced at him and smiled. You've been researching again. I like knowing the math behind safety. We didn't talk much after that. There was nothing left to explain. The road did the work for us. When we arrived, it was already evening. The apartment was modest, clean, temporary, exactly what we needed. No history, no watchers, no expectations. My son walked through each room carefully. This one has good acoustics, he said, tapping a wall. This one smells like old books, he added approvingly. He claimed the smaller room again, immediately setting up his bookshelf as if the world made sense once books were in place. That night, neither of us slept well, not because of fear, because change hums in the body like electricity. The next morning, we started building routine immediately. Grocery store, library card application, walk around the block at the same time each day. Predictability is safety when you've lived in chaos. My son adapted faster than I expected. At the new school, he corrected the teacher gently, explained his needs clearly, asked for accommodations without apology. Watching him advocate for himself felt like witnessing something sacred. One afternoon, as we sat on the apartment steps watching the sky darken, he said, They won't like that we left. I know. But they can't argue with absence. Exactly. Weeks passed without incident. No calls, no letters, no sudden appearances. The quiet this time felt different, not like a pause, like an ending. One night, as I tucked him in, he asked, Do you think we'll ever have to explain this to anyone? Only if we want to, he nodded. Then I vote no. Me too. Because some stories don't need witnesses. They just need survivors. And for the first time, I believed we were finally becoming exactly that. A month into our new life, my son asked the question I'd been waiting for. Are we keeping our old last name? I set down the dish towel and turned to face him. He was sitting at the table, legs swinging slightly, eyes steady, not anxious, curious. We don't have to, I said carefully. Why do you ask? He opened his notebook and slid it toward me. On the page were lists, names crossed out, some circled, some annotated with reasons. I've been thinking, he said. Names are identifiers. Identifiers make you easier to track. I smiled softly. That's true. But they're also stories, he continued. And ours changed. I sat across from him. Do you want a new one? Yes, he said without hesitation. One that belongs to us, not them. We treated it like something important because it was. We talked about meaning, about sound, about how it felt in your mouth when you said it out loud. He rejected names that felt sharp, names that sounded loud, names that carried too much history. Then he looked up suddenly. What about something that means movement? I raised an eyebrow. Like what? Walker, he said. It means someone who keeps going. I repeated it quietly. Walker. He nodded. It sounds like forward. That night, after he went to bed, I sat alone and tested it again and again. My name, our name, lighter, cleaner, ours. A week later, the paperwork began. New documents, new records, new introductions. The first time someone called us by our new name, my son froze. Then he smiled. I like it, he whispered. Me too. At school, he corrected anyone who stumbled, not defensively, just factually. This is our name now. At home, he taped a small label to his bedroom door. Walker. This is where we live, he said. The name didn't erase the past, but it gave us a future that wasn't tethered to it. That night, as I turned off the light, he asked one more question. Do you think they'll ever stop looking? I thought carefully before answering. Eventually, I said, because people who chase control don't know what to do when it's gone. He smiled sleepily. Good. And for the first time, our name felt like armor, not hiding us, protecting us, one step forward at a time. It's been years since we left, long enough that fear no longer wakes me up before my alarm, long enough that my son laughs without checking the room first, long enough that our lives feel lived, not defended. We didn't become invisible. We became ordinary, and that turned out to be the greatest victory of all. Our mornings are slow now, breakfast at the same table, the same chair for him, the same mug for me. He still lines up his books before school, but now it's habit, not anxiety. He's older, taller, still brilliant in the quiet way that doesn't need applause. Sometimes he tells people he's autistic without flinching. I process differently, he says. It's efficient. They don't always know how to respond. He doesn't mind. Our home is filled with things that prove time passed safely. Drawings on the fridge, shoes by the door, a calendar that actually plans ahead. No court dates circled in red, no emergency folders hidden in drawers, just life. Once a teacher asked if I was worried about him being too protected. I smiled. No, I said. I'm confident he knows how to protect himself now. That night, as we sat outside watching the sky change colors, he leaned against my shoulder. No, I think we did it, he said. Did what? Built something they can't reach. He was right. We don't talk about them anymore. Not because it hurts, but because it doesn't matter. They don't get a chapter in this version of our story. Sometimes I think about the woman I was back then, the one who thought survival was the same thing as living. I wish I could tell her this. You don't have to win every battle. You just have to choose yourself once and keep choosing after that. My son turned to me and smiled. I like our life, he said. So do I. This is the life I have now, and no one gets to take it from us.